Hello and welcome to you. Terrific to have you with me. He was one of the pioneers of Aussie rock, one of the country's finest singer-songwriters, and one of the most successful artists and producers to find international fame. Today my very special guest is Brian Cadd, and I'm sure you're going to find it fascinating as Brian takes us on a journey through his early days with the band The Groop, to his collaborations with the Little River Band's Glenn Shorrock, all the way to finally fulfilling a lifelong dream to put out a solo country rock album.
What a great name, Breath of Fresh Air. Fantastic.
Let's talk about you, Brian, because I know quite a bit about you, having lived in Australia all my life and grown up with your music. But there are a whole lot of people listening to this that may not know the name Brian Cadd and may not, well, they probably have experienced your music in some shape or form. But I'd like, if you don't mind, for you to walk us through your life from how it all started out to where we are today.
Good heavens, how long ago?
I've got a while. Let me start you off. What I know about you is that you were born in Perth in Australia on the West Coast, and you came to prominence first with a band called The Groop. Tell us how you even got to that point.
Well, I was the eldest kid, and my mother was a failed soprano. She was a very good singer, but she was terrified of audiences. So when I came along, it was a little, like most houses back then, had some little piano in the corridor or whatever that they'd inherited from a great aunt. As a little kid, I started banging out little melodies. So she was inspired to transfer her ambitions, if you like, to me. So she became the archetypal stage mum. And so she volunteered me for everything from that moment on, even though I could barely play. When I was 12, she volunteered me for a Christmas special on the very new Channel 7 in Perth. And then about 2 weeks later, people from 7 rang and said to her, would you be interested in him playing every week on television because we're going to keep the band together and do it on our children's channels? She said, oh, of course, yes, absolutely, thanks. So for a year, I spent playing piano on television. That was it for me.
Brian knew from that moment on what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. In 1966, he joined a band called The Groop, and suddenly he was tasked with writing songs.
The drummer and I had never written a song, so they put us together, thanks very much. And we were in the garage just sitting there looking at each other, and he started doing on his cymbals, and I went ding, ding. And after about 10 minutes, we came up with Woman, You're Breaking Me. It was the first song I ever wrote, and it was a hit. And from that time on, I split my time between being in bands and then being a solo artist and also being a writer and producer. That was a time when Melbourne was going through an enormous trad jazz thing. So I was really, in great demand. And then all of a sudden, the mods came in and pow, everyone had flares and Paisley and we all went mod. And so I finished up in a rock and roll band and eventually in The Groop.
Were you challenged by that change in culture?
No, I think we embraced it because it wasn't driven by outside forces. It was driven by the very audiences that we were playing jazz to. And then they all went, oh, well, we won't do this anymore. Well, now the Beatles are here and the Stones are here. So we want to be like, want you to be like them. So it was a natural progression for audience and for us as musicians.
And of course, at that time in Australia, there were very, very few Aussie bands around. You guys were all looking to the UK and the US for inspiration, I'd imagine, weren't you?
That was it. Nobody wrote. And, even when you did television back in those days, television stations had no recording facilities. You just had demand. And if it became a hit, it was our hit. But there were no real songwriters. Harry Vander and George Young from the Easy Beat.
You were really one of the forerunners in starting to write your own material here. What made you decide to start going down that path?
Really just that one song. And when it went up the charts, there was always really good reasons to keep going. Not that I had any idea how to write songs, but it doesn't take much of a journey when you spend your whole life playing songs. It's not that more difficult. If you come up with a nice theme or a title or something, you already kind of know the structures in your head because you played thousands of songs that had great structures that were hits. It's not as though you're starting from rule number one.
Right.
And it was an easier time too because it wasn't a very high standard. We weren't writing Sergeant Pepper. We were writing basically little nursery rhyme kind of songs back in those times. it was much easier path. I wouldn't want to be learning it today.
What effect did it have on your life, having that hit song?
Oh, it was great. It was enormous. In those days, records and radio charts were the most important thing. And it affected you dramatically immediately because you stopped being number 28 on the bill and became number 4. And then when it got higher, you became number 1 on the bill. And that affected you not only financially, but in terms of your fame, if you like, and where you played and being on television and being in Go Set all the time and all those things only really happened if they were driven by records. In those days, records were king. And, we were lucky enough to have written some.
And that song actually broke through to the US, didn't it?
Yeah, it had a bit of a go over there. It's only really that we had no actual connections with the US. It took forever for Australian music to break into the US. It was much easier for us to work in Europe and particularly in the UK because that's where Australians always went. So when we went to London, we weren't that different from all the people there because we've been ripping them off for years. And we sounded just like they did. Whereas in America, it was a very different scene, the Beach Boys and all those kind of bands. And that was quite a lot different from the English rock. So we were lucky in that sense. We came a sort of blessed path for a while. We just went over and hung out with the easy beats.
So you kept writing during that time. And of course, the group then enjoyed another hit, In Such a Lovely Way.
Yeah, that was when we came back.
It's Such a Lovely Way was a song that you also wrote?
Yeah.
So your writing career had certainly kicked off really well because in the interim you'd written some songs for Melbourne singer Ronnie Burns. And then, of course, you started working with Russell Morris on what became one of Australia's biggest songs in The Real Thing.
Yeah, that's right. And that was Molly, or Ian as he was known back then. He started out as our roadie. But he was not a roadie. The only thing he ever carried were drinks. He never carried a microphone stand in his whole life. But he was great fun, the great vibe. Anyway, when he finally got involved with Russ, he just took the group, me and the other boys, into play, and I arranged the single and everything. And it was one of the great moments of my life. We had so many, including the kitchen sink, we had every single thing you could think of on that record. And it was 5.5 minutes long, and everyone said, no one in Australia is going to play that. That's ridiculous. So not only did they play it, but it was number 1 for about 70 years.
Did you believe in it from the start?
I believed in the record. The hook to the song was so obvious. I never understood what it really meant. I don't think Russell understands what it really means, but I don't think Johnny Young understands what it really means. But the point was, it didn't have just one hook. It had about 3 different hooks in it, including which Russell probably told you was originally meant to be a guitar line. It wasn't meant to be sung. And it was actually Molly's genius that said, no, we'll sing it. We're not playing it. And that's how good he was. I mean, he was so ridiculously unique. I'm really proud to have been involved in that. And it's given me and Russell 60 years of friendship.
The group then broke up in 1969, which led you to form the band Axiom. Why did you split up? I mean, you were enjoying quite a deal of success. What happened?
Oh, it's just time. Really, Ronnie Charles had already got it. He loved England and he didn't really want to come home. So it just sort of, we melted away. Right. That also coincided with a burgeoning friendship with Glenn
Shorrock.
And we both fell in love, him in the trials and me in the group in England. We were both there and we both fell in love with the band. That changed our lives, both of us, and indeed a great many people around the world. And all of a sudden I thought, this is where I want to be, this country rock thing, whatever that is. And then I discovered Flying Burritos, who later on I joined, and the Birds and all those beautiful West Coast bands. And there was such an impetus for him and I, and we formed a new band and called it Axiom. It was a great time for Australian music. We stopped being that we're going to cover everything that the Kinks did to let's write some songs and do an album. That was a pretty serious jump for us. 6 or 7 years before, there were virtually no songwriters in Australia. And all of a sudden we went from that into songwriters getting together and forming bands and writing songs in order to make records. That was a big step.
You hadn't started writing about Australia yet. Despite being an Australian songwriter, you were still writing about other things that people knew about rather than your own home territory.
Well, the reason for that was twofold. First of all, because we were still getting over the band, and their whole music genre was based on basically the Civil War or those times in America's past. The other thing was that when I was very, very young, my best friend, his dad was obsessed with the American Civil War. And when you went round to his place to play, in the living room there were tables on which were set the various battles of the Civil War with little soldiers and everything. So from about 6 or 7, I just fell in love with it. When I wrote Arkansas Grass, that was based on just this mythical bloke who's trying to get home, and it came out at the same time as Australians in Vietnam. So it was my version of a protest song.
And of course, the very next one you did was the classic A Little Ray of Sunshine that I'm sure you're still dining out on today because it still gets radio play everywhere. Now, the last time I spoke with you, you refused to tell me the real story about A Little Ray of Sunshine. Are you prepared to tell me? You can't see it, but Brian is vigorously shaking his head. What could the big secret about this song be? The song we're talking about is A Little Ray of Sunshine. It was written by Brian Cadd and Don Moody and released by their group Axiom in 1970. The song has been on people's lips ever since it appeared on the charts, but its meaning has always been shrouded in mystery. Some say it was inspired by the birth of Don Moody's first child. Brian has often said the song was written about his niece to celebrate her arrival. Are you prepared to tell me? Still not.
No, but it's because it involves somebody real whose life, who doesn't know and whose life would change if I told you the truth.
So it's really never going to come out, Brian Cadd?
No, it's not worth it. It's not worth it now. I mean, if she turned up on my deathbed, I might tell her. But no, it doesn't serve any purpose, and it would make her life very different.
I do understand that. So tell us a little bit about how that song came about.
But it did come about because of the situation that her parents were in, which is what makes the story very complicated. Some dreadful stuff happened between the two of them. They should never have had a dance together, much as kid. They didn't have a kid. But they did. And they were very close to Axiom, this couple. And we were very knocked out by them. This beautiful little girl arrived, And there was such animosity and fighting. And how couples, when they fight, there's people who vie for the girl and people who barrack for the bloke. And it sort of divided us up. And I was determined that this little baby was going to be acknowledged. So I wrote a song about this girl. So it's a very personal song for me. But what was lucky about it was that because it got so much play, and it was at a time when our audiences were all young and all having babies. It had to come out in, the 80s, would have been a different period. It came out in the mid-60s or a bit later. All of our contemporary audience were young marrieds. They were all having kids and stuff. I wish I had just even $10 for every time somebody said to me, when we brought our little Rosalind home from the hospital, we heard it in the car on the way. So I have a theory that there's a radio network that only operates outside maternity wards and it only plays us.
It's certainly given a lot of people a lot of pleasure over time, hasn't it?
Yeah, and the fact that I have now been blessed with 5 granddaughters makes it even more special. That's one of the very few songs I've ever written that are about anyone I know.
So Axiom was going great guns, and then Axiom disbanded. How come everybody took a break at that point?
Oh, the same thing happened. We zigged when we should have zagged. Axiom needed to go to America. It was an American band, American-sounding band. Our heroes were all American bands. We didn't sound remotely like the Trogs. We sounded like all those American bands, and we wrote those kind of songs. But as I said, it was almost impossible for bands back in those days to go to America. There were very few people that actually went at that time. Olivia only got there, in the 70s. There was virtually nobody ever went. But once again, it was really easy for us to go to England, which was a gigantic, stupid move because we went to the very place that we were trying not to emulate or trying not to fit in with because we could. And we got signed to CBS, a guy called Shel Talmy who produced The Who and all those great bands. He loved us and we recorded the whole album in London exactly the way we wanted to do it, with all our harmonies and all our bits and pieces. and we left it there for him to mix. When we got back to England, the whole album was covered in brass and strings. It was like a Tony Bennett album. It was the most horrible thing to do to an album. And he loved the songs and he really liked the idea, but he was locked back in that genre. And we were just so heartbroken, and they weren't going to take it off. They released it just exactly like it was. After the failure of the group and the failure of the Twilights, and then us to form this band and have the album we exactly wanted with the songs we exactly wanted, it was just broke everyone's heart. And so Glenn stayed in England, and then the rest of us came back. And then that's when I started my solo career.
Being an Australian band at that time and not really being able to compete with either the UK or the US bands, was there a sense of not being good enough?
Probably, and we were thwarted at every turn. Let's supposing we had been able to figure out how to go to Los Angeles, which happened for me only about 5 or 6 years later, but it was way after that. We might have been signed to Elektra or Warner's or something, and we might have worked with an American producer, and we might have gone on the road with Poco. We might have, all the might-haves could have happened there. None of them were ever going to happen in England, and that's what killed us. We just did a stupid thing.
Your decision to go solo was as a result of all of these disappointments?
No. When I came back, I said, I've been on the road now for, 10 years. Felt like my whole life. And I'd been in bands that whole time. And I really had become interested in recording. And I wanted to produce records because I knew I could write. And I wanted to get used to projects where I could write and I could produce them. So I finished up with Ron Tudor. I worked for Fable for a while, his first label. And then he and I formed Bootleg together, Bootleg Records. And we had some real success. The first thing we did was do an album on me. And that caused the Ginger Man single. Ginger Man came out and nobody really, thought of anything because it was quite different from anyone. And I thought, well, he can release it if he wants to, but I don't imagine it's going to be a hit. Anyway, it was a massive hit. And there I was, back on the road again. I had a lot of great things happen in a very small period of time. Things like Alvin Purple and Class of 74 and all those great projects that weren't record projects as well.
They're Australian movies, right?
And I produced a lot of acts. I had the best time. It was one of the great times of my life.
Despite this, Brian still couldn't get over his obsession with still wanting to be in America. But instead of simply going to visit, he moved there. But although he found success as a writer and producer, he never reached the same level of artist success that he'd enjoyed on his home soil.
It took me years before I actually even made another record.
A lot of the writing that you were doing, you had a lot of well-known artists cover your songs, didn't you?
Oh, yeah. That was the momentum that was driving me. I lived in Los Angeles. Everyone lived in Los Angeles. You met famous people and famous producers and famous arrangers in the bar on Sunset, at 1 o'clock in the morning. Everyone was everywhere all the time. It wasn't hard. And as much as it was a big industry, it was still quite small and you could find people fairly easily. So networking and some publishing deals and stuff like that got me into the writing realm because it's the only one that's really continued for 60 years.
The number of songs that people recorded, people like Gene Pitney, Glenn Campbell, Dobie Gray, Cilla Black, Wayne Newton, Bonnie Tyler, Joe Cocker, even Ringo Starr. And you actually had your biggest success when the Pointer Sisters covered Love Is Like a Rolling Stone, which appeared on the B-side of their version of Fire. Share a story around how one of those recordings actually came about for you.
Pointers is a good example because that was absolutely networking. I'd gotten very close to Dee Murray and Davey Johnson from Elton's band. And at that point, Davey started hanging with the Pointers, playing with them on their demos. And I think he did a few live gigs with them, stuff like that. And then it came time for them to make an album. And Davey and I just demoed Love Is Like a Rolling Stone. When it came time to talk about songs for their album, he played it and they loved it. So my publisher rings me and he says, now, I don't know whether this is good news or not. He said, I'll tell you anyway. He said, their next single is going to be a Bruce Springsteen song called Fire. And he said, the Pointer Sisters have insisted that your song's on the B-side. And it sold 12 million records. And the killer is you get paid the same for the B-side as you do for the A-side. So that was the greatest non-hit I ever had.
You still hadn't accomplished your dream of turning your talents to country music, though, even though Charlie Daniels' band covered in 1985 on their No Stone Unturned album, they covered You're Still Hurting Me.
Yeah.
So you're getting closer, and then you took yourself off to Nashville.
Yeah, and that was because it's the end of the 80s, and everything in Los Angeles was hip-hop. There was no other kind of music. You couldn't get records cut by anybody.
Right.
And all my major writing pals had all moved to Nashville. Just songwriter heaven. Every person was a songwriter. I can remember I arrived there first by myself, and I got a cab from Nashville Airport into Franklin, where I was staying. And on the way in the cab, the cab driver pitched me a cassette of his songs. And I thought, I have arrived. This is where I'm supposed to be. It was the greatest 5 years. I had the best time.
Brian's reign in Nashville lasted several years. There he joined the Flying Burrito Brothers in 91 and toured with them for a couple of years before returning to Australia in 1993. The Flying Burrito Brothers are a country rock band, best known for their influential debut album from 1969. The group was founded by Graham Parsons and Chris Hillman, both formerly of the Byrds, but the band underwent many personnel changes and has existed ever since in various incarnations.
One of the Flying Burrito Brothers is a guy called John Beal, and he and I were best friends from years before in Los Angeles, and we wrote there and we produced lots of people at that studio in Nashville. And the Flying Burrito Brothers decided they were going to reform and do a new album. Not that there were that many of them alive, but they were trying. So they started sending songs over to John for us to demo, just so they could play to the record company. They all lived in Los Angeles. Because there were no singers there, I sang the demos. Anyway, it went on for about a month, and then finally one of the guys rang me and said, it's just too hard this way. Why don't you join the band? So it just happened like that, and all of a sudden I was in the Flying Burrito. And I had a great 3 years with them, toured all over the world. And those kind of bands, their audiences are very loyal, extremely loyal. I mean, we were playing 25 years after they'd played in Germany, and the places were raging, and the audiences would turn up in cowboy outfits with cap guns and sheriff's badges, because the Germans could never figure out the difference between country and western. They thought it was all the same thing, not realising that they were country rock. And the first night we ever played anywhere in Germany, I'm on stage playing around, I can hear pow, 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 pow. I said to John, what's that? He said, oh, they're just cap guns. I looked down, there's all these great big Germans with their cap guns out firing in the air. It was terrifying.
Lucky you weren't playing in America. They wouldn't have been cap guns.
No, they would have been much more real. In a way, it was completing the circle, because the Flying Burrito Brothers and the Birds and people like that were people that influenced me enormously back when I first started.
You can't be afraid of change, can you, in an industry like yours? You finish one chapter without any fear about what's coming next. You just step forward into the unknown, I guess, with the confidence that all's going to be well, something else is going to come up.
Oh, I think it was something I consciously wanted to do. I always found that if I stepped slightly to the left or slightly to the right, or just tried this because I'd never tried one of those before, if I was keen about it, if I happened to be any good at it, it would kind of launch me into a new phase. So in the same way as writing for film was slightly different from writing for artists, it's still the same box and dice, it's still the same thing. And in the same way as working with country bands and working with country artists, they're still all verses and choruses. It's not that different, but it adds another string to your bow. It meant when one string got a bit slack, the other one would tighten up a bit, and you'd be over there doing a movie, or you'd be working with a country artist. Or you'd be on the road with Russell or something. There was always lots of things, and there still is. That's probably the reason I'm still here, I suppose, because I can never get a break. I can't see any reason to stop other than if it was a physical reason. I have no plans on retiring because I can't do anything else. I can't bowl and I can't play golf.
Right.
You know, all I can do is cook. That's the only thing, and I don't want to start a restaurant.
Brian Cadd, are you telling me though that there's a slight disappointment that you never reached the heights that you would have liked to?
No, not really, because I just did it in a different way. The fact that all those people recorded my songs over all those years was such an incredible thing to happen to me. In the end, it was sort of, well, that's just the part that I didn't get to happen. But, I might have done that and not written the songs for other people that I did, not been involved in all of those areas of the industry that enabled me to meet those people and work with them. Yeah. Six of one, half a dozen others.
You certainly managed to stay friends with all your long-time buddies, with Glenn Shorrock, who you'd been in Axiom with, of course, who fronted Little River Band for such a long time, with Russell Morris, who did The Real Thing, and you did a country album with him in 2011. So I guess you managed to appease all sides of you and get your piece that way.
Absolutely. I figured out that if I had a sandbox with enough toys in it, I didn't need to play with one really hardly. I could
spread the love.
That translates perfectly to my new grandson, because they only last about a minute on this toy and then they go to this toy.
Yeah, that's right.
I've been like that in a way.
They call that something else, though, when you're an adult.
What do they call it? Attention deficit. Shut up.
In 2016, you released a new studio album with the Bootleg Family Band called Bulletproof. In 2019, which was the last time we spoke, everything in my mind is pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, you did Silver City. And now your latest offering is, I guess, what you've been hoping for such a long time, your very first solo country album entitled Dream Train. Fill us in on that one a bit.
It was one of those ones where I just thought, it's time to do a new album. It'd be fun. The record company's going, you want to do one? And, that when that happens, I sift through all my notebooks and little recordings of little snatches of things. And things started to gravitate towards a song list, if you like, or a bag of ideas. And when I looked in the bag, I realised that a lot of them were country ideas. It just happened that way, because I picked things that I really liked, and I thought, wait a minute, there's a pattern here. I think that's probably a sign. And it probably wouldn't have happened except that living up here, I discovered this amazing studio on the Gold Coast, and this lunatic that runs it is wonderful. And he has this great house band of country players, and they record Williamson and, Troy and all those people. They make all the great records, and they're all locals. So we just decided, book a few days and go in with the loonies and see what happens. And after about 5 days, we realised we had an album and that it was a country album. I am so proud of it now. It's really one of the nicer things that have happened to me as an artist.
What's your favourite track on it?
A song called The One That Got Away.
What are you referring to?
I'll never tell.
Oh, come on, not another story you'll never tell. That's too much.
Well, that'd really get me into trouble, that one.
Come on, we won't tell Amanda.
You know what? If, and I've said this a bit before, if Let Go had a younger sibling, it would be this song. They're both in the same vein and not the same subject, but they both are enormously gorgeous to sing, and they are very personal to people. Most every one of us has had one that got away, and so it relates exactly. I mean, I sing it, I look out at the audience and they go, You can tell that some of them are at least thinking about the one that got away. So I'm very happy with that, and that's in the country charts now and downloading very well. And I'm so happy that I've been accepted in this light because, it was a bit of a sell. I thought, maybe they'll just think I'm cashing in on country music or whatever, but they don't realise. But a lot of people realise that that's an old path for me.
And one of your earliest desires. You must be really thrilled to be at the helm of the power of a great song, to be able to influence people. And it's been 6 decades that you've been doing that. What is it about songs that affect people so greatly, do you think?
I believe that in your head you've got this vast RAM hard drive, and it stores all of the things that ever happened to you. And the reason I know this is because very often I'll write a song, work on it, and I'll get almost everything right, but there'd be one line that I can't either come up at all with or that is not right. And over the years, I've learnt to not worry about it and just leave it. 2 days later or a week later, I'll be driving somewhere, I'll be in the shower, I'll be, in the middle of the supermarket, and I'll sing the part. And when I get to that line, the right words will arrive. Now, I know it's my subconscious continues to work on the line, sorting through my massive hard drive. At 77, it's a massive hard drive, and finds the one that I need. If you think about that in terms of your hard drive, if I write a line that says hot blonde in a red sports car, you won't get my picture of that. You'll get your picture of it. In the same way that anything that happens in a song that talks about anything will trigger something in your hard drive. That's my theory. And I think that's why it works. Because you're not thinking about my song. You're thinking about your song.
What an incredible power to have there.
A lot of fun.
I bet it is. And it continues to be. Brian Cadd, thank you for sharing all your stories and your wisdom with us. It's been
Thank
awesome.
you for having me.
Brian Cadd's Dream Train album is the country album he was always destined to make. I definitely think you should get on board with it too. Thanks so much for your company today. I hope you've enjoyed learning all about Australia's own Brian Cadd. Don't forget, if you have a request for a guest, just get in touch with me through the website, abreathofreshair.com.au. It'd be my pleasure to try and chase that person up for you and get them onto the show. Can I count on you joining me again next week? I hope so. Take care in the meantime, won't you? Bye now.